just let's get up to speed where we're at now. We've been discussing the verse Kol Doidi Deifek Pischili Rayasi Achesi Rayasi Yenasi Samasi. And we said that the Kol Doidi, the sound of my beloved, the Eibishter, God is called our beloved because and when we say he's our lover, it means the essential love that he has for us, because he's outside and we're inside, meaning that there we seem to be going through a rough patch in our relationship, and nevertheless he's still referred to as our lover because he loves us unconditionally. And it's because of that unconditional love that even though he's locked outside, he's knocking on the door and asking us to open. And we said the request to open the door, just even a crack, that represents self-sacrifice. When a Jew uncovers that essential bond with God, that leads then to recognizing that we're Achaisi, we're God's sister, meaning that we are naturally revealing that natural love we have for God. That's why it's called Achaisi, because it's a natural love that we have, that we've inherited from our ancestors. Also, Achaisi means connection, and it represents the idea of the connection between God and the world, which we said is all something that is very rational, something that we can explain even to our animal soul. The fact that the entirety, all of existence is dependent on God, is a conditional existence, and therefore it doesn't have an independent existence. Its whole existence is that it's bound to God. And when we recognize that, that also naturally produces a natural love for God, just as we have a natural love for ourselves and for self-preservation. When we recognize that our existence is dependent on God and conditional only on God willing us into existence, desiring us, etc. We discussed the two levels of it, the difference between speaking the world into existence versus wanting the world into existence. Then we have that love. Then we said that love is all, even though it's natural, that's limited, that's natural. It's not something that's new and developed. Then we have the level of Rayasi, where we're referred to as God's spouse. And specifically, when we say his spouse, we're referring to his supporter, almost like his breadwinner, as it were. What does that mean? That represents a new thing, like you said, developed, that we're developing a new love. Just as you have your natural love for your siblings, your spouse is somebody that you learn to love, you develop a new love, somebody that you didn't know before, and now you've developed a new love, so it represents something new. And similarly, when we talk about Rayasi, we're talking about bringing something new into reality. Not just revealing or acknowledging or recognizing the natural state of creation, which is natural state of existence, which is that it's only dependent on God, but actually drawing God's infinity into creation. God as he transcends creation. In other words, like we said, we quoted, it was Tuesday, we quoted that that creating worlds is not God's main function. Creating worlds is like something he does on the weekend. It's a hobby of his. God is not all about the fact that he's creator, meaning that God is way beyond creation. And so there's a level of godliness that's transcendent, that transcends reality. It's too great to come into reality, and we have the capacity to bring it into this world, to make that manifest in this world. How do we do that? Through Torah. Torah is God's bread, and just as bread connects body and soul, two things that seem to be incompatible, it's the same thing as Torah is the bread that connects transcendent level of God with the finite, limited world. So that's what we said about Rayasi. That's why we're referred to as Rayasi when through learning Torah, we draw God into the world. We said that Torah, why is it? What is that about Torah? Why is Torah called the bread? Meaning that why is it referred to food? Because it has the capacity to combine these two incompatible things. But why is it? Because Torah is beyond creation. Because creation stems. This is what we said right at the end of chapter 5. We sort of rushed through it on Tuesday. Creation comes from God's emotions, as it were, his attributes, the kindness. God creates the world through kindness and judgment. Olam Chesed Yibana. And Torah represents God's intellect, or comes from God's intellect, as it were, Chachma, and that's beyond. So the level of godliness that's present in creation, that connects with creation, is the emotions that invest and engage in creating. Chachma, which remains removed, disconnected from that, That's where Torah comes from. It says Alpaim Shana Kadma Torah La'olam. Torah precedes creation by 2,000 years. It doesn't mean 2,000 actual years, because years, time, was created with creation. So how could the Torah precede time within a certain amount of time? So it doesn't mean an actual amount of time. It means that it's greater, that it's beyond. It's totally removed and beyond creation. Okay. And so therefore it has the capacity to bring God into creation. Similarly, we said that the idea of serving God with on the level of achaisi, that's natural, a natural service. That's not going outside of yourself. That's just recognizing the truth of your existence and therefore naturally loving God. Torah, when we talk about rayasi, we're talking about going out of our own comfort zone. We're talking about going beyond our capacity and serving God, b'chol ma'idecha, as we said, with all our might, meaning beyond our capacity, beyond our abilities. When we go outside of ourselves, in the analogy we gave of relationships, there's doing things for somebody else that are natural to us, and there are plenty of things that other people, hopefully there are plenty of things that are natural to us, that are easy for us to do, that other people like, natural qualities that we have, and we do that for them and they appreciate it. But then there's when you do things that are outside of your comfort zone. That takes the relationship to a whole nother level. It represents a depth of relationship where you're going out of your comfort zone, beyond yourself. So that's much deeper. So that's where you have achaisi is the first level, and the next step up is rayasi. Okay, now chapter 6. Amnam, Beizei Fani Aveda, the two modes of service, the achaisi v'rayasi of my sister and my bride. Kshurim adayin im seder shtalshus, they still are related to creation, to reality. Either when we're talking about actual creation, the level of achaisi, or when we're talking about drawing a level that transcends reality, that God should come fill the world, and His transcendence should fill creation, should fill reality. That's the level of rayasi. So 1 second. We just, in our little summary, getting up to date here, we said that there's the level of the natural level, which is achaisi, and then there's beyond, which is rayasi. Now we're saying no, even that level of beyond is still connected to creation. But what does that mean? We just said it's incompatible, it's transcendent, or it's infinite, doesn't fit into creation. What does that mean that it also is related? So what he's saying here is there's the level of achaisi, which is immanence, nature, that's serving God within the framework of nature, in the natural order. Rayasi represents transcendence. But when we say transcendence, we're implying that there's still a connection. This transcends that. A transcends B. So even though it's not a positive connection, it's sort of a negative kind of a connection, but there's still a connection. So there's a certain relationship with it. So when we and the common denominator between the two, between achaisi and rayasi, is both revolve around nature, both involve nature, either within nature or transcending nature. But either way, when you say something transcends something else, you're saying that it has, that nature sort of takes up space for it, exists to it, but it's beyond it. So there's a certain compatibility. Going back to the analogy we gave, I think at the beginning of last class, about throwing a stone. So even though there's the force that you have to throw a stone that now is propelling the stone, so even though they're two different things, but still there's a connection between them. That's why your capacity to throw can be expressed in the stone. But when we talk about your intellect, the intellect, there's no common language, there's no bond, not even a negative one. They're two different worlds. There's no way to, and they're two different realities. So the stone doesn't exist, as it were, in its reality, in the mind, as it exists in the mind. It's two totally different things. Okay. So when we say achaisi rayasi, be it a positive relationship or a negative one, either way, meaning an immanent or transcendent one, either way, there's still a connection, it's still connected to this reality. After this, we come to the next step, a higher level, shenikras yoinasi, my dove. Shezeu k'moshel hayoinim, shemistaklim zeh bazeh. This is, as an example, the doves that gaze at each other, in a manner in which they draw the essence of pleasure through this gaze. Yeah, so there's a You could say dove's eyes. If it says, the pasuk says, "Einayich yoinim," your eyes are doves, and there's an expression, dove's eyes, which so on the pasuk "Einayich yoinim," so the Medrash gives a whole list. What does it mean? Your eyes are doves. What is it? So it gives a whole list of reasons why we're compared to doves. A common theme through all of them is the idea between the different ones. This is talking about Sanhedrin. It's talking about this, whatever it's talking about. The common theme is that we're talking about people that are faithful. Why are we compared to doves? Because doves are faithful. They're monogamous. They pick a partner and they remain faithful to that partner. They remain faithful to their nest. In the Medrash, it lists different characteristics of the dove, and all of them represent this faithfulness. And even the concept of dove's eyes, you say you have dove's eyes, it means that you have eyes exclusively for somebody, for one person, not for more than one. It's one specific person. Here we're talking a little bit beyond, so we're talking about this idea of exclusivity, but specifically, why specifically the eyes? Why are we talking about the eyes? Because the eyes, as we're going to read, have the capacity to access your very core. They're the window into the soul. That's why it's very difficult to look at somebody, to gaze at somebody in any kind of meaningful way. It makes people very uncomfortable. Because through the eyes, you have the ability to get to the depth of the other person. And there's I think it was Mendel Futafas, it asked somebody, he said he wanted to talk to them. So he said, we're on the phone, why do we talk now? He says, thieves talk on the phone. Friends talk with the eyes. Right? Something to that effect. Right? You speak with the eyes. There's a lot more that gets conveyed through the eyes. But here specifically, we mean the pleasure that comes as a result of the gaze of the eyes. And that exclusivity, that exclusiveness that you're totally connected with the other one. So that's yoinasi. So what was happening here? You're accessing the pleasure. The klolos in histaklos u'amaka yesach hazak. What is the idea of histaklos, of this gazing, of this peering, and looking deeply? Is the idea of a deep gaze that's possible by a person, reaching the depth of the other person. That's possible through histaklos, through this gazing. This represents this idea of connection, that the strongest type of connection. Be it as a result of physical seeing, or if we're talking about seeing with the mind's eye, but in the greatest measure, the greatest way, till the point of seeing and gazing, and connecting the b'chinas hachachma of the level of chachma. What's means seeing with the mind's eye, meaning you can understand, you can see something, you understand something, and you can dissect it and analyze it. But then you've got it so deep, you see it with your mind's eye, and then so seeing represents makes a deep impression on the person, more so than hearing. You can hear something, you can study something, you process it, and it connects and it resonates. But when you see it, it leaves a much deeper impression, because seeing goes all the way into the core. So there's the physical seeing, and it happens with physical seeing, but we're also talking about intellectual seeing with the mind. Right. So you say when you see something is so real to you that you can see it in your mind. You use that expression. You can see it. You can taste it. You can feel it. You can taste it. You say it. But the highest form is seeing it, where it's alive in front of your eyes. This is the idea of gazing at the glory of the king. Gazing at the glory of the king implies that there's that deep connection. It has that profound impact. It reaches you and touches you to your core, and at the core is pleasure. So it's delighting in that experience.
What does it mean at the core is pleasure?
At the core of a person is the highest function. Would be pleasure. We say that's what we're all about. No, it doesn't mean it's all about that. We're just but pleasure is the core of will, which is, as we discussed last time, will is the highest, is an expression of the soul, and at the core of will is pleasure. Okay. This is the service that is a result of Yoinasi, the dove. This is the idea of seeing, looking from down here, from below to above. We come to be to see. Nasa Gama Istaklus Milmai Lamata, and through that we also have the idea of seeing from above. Einei Avayil Tzadikim, God's eyes are turned to the righteous. Meaning he's peering, he's looking at us. This is something that's not at all connected to the natural order. Because it's in that gaze, that when your eyes lock, that contains the whole intensity of pleasure, hachibur, the connection, vaiskashrus, and the bonding, vaisachtas, and the oneness. What are we saying here? The level of Yonosi represents pleasure, finding pleasure and finding it only in that other, in the significant other. In our case, talking about with God. So when we're talking about Achaisi and Rayasi, these are all levels that represent something other, levels that relate to reality. So we're seeing God as something separate of us, and we're bonding with Him. But there's still a reality, there's still existence, there's still a world. We recognize that the world, and we can rationally come to the conclusion the world doesn't exist outside of God, separate from God, but still it exists. Be it in the manner of Achaisi, or even in the manner of Rayasi. Either way, it still has its own existence. It feels its own existence. But when the level of Yonosi means where your pleasure is the other one. In other words, there is no you anymore. It goes beyond you. There's and it's interesting. I'll try to touch on another angle in a second, but just interesting. You look here in the Maimer, the last words here of the paragraph, that in this seeing, in this gaze, you have the whole intensity of the pleasure. And then he says, Hachibur v'hiskashrus v'hisachtas. The Rebbe says the Maimer, and he just, every word is significant and exactly in the right order, where I think it seems like it's going in order here. There's chibur. Chibur is when two things connect, are combined. That's one form of union. A higher bond is hiskashrus. Hiskashrus is like a knot, a kesher, where two things are bound together. So they're not just glued together, they're bound together. When they're bound together, they're tied together. You can't even necessarily tell one from the other, right? It's hard, besides the fact that it's harder to break apart, but they're intertwined, they're interlocked. And then you have this achdus, that's oneness, that's even beyond that. So it goes sort of in order here, just casually throws it out there, these different terms, and it represents this great, we see the extent of this, the connection that is the level of Yonosi, that histaklos, this gazing, this peering, represents pleasure. Why are you gazing? Why are you looking? And only at that one? Because that's where your pleasure is. Right. So if it's about you finding pleasure, you can find pleasure in anything and everything. I mean, if you really look hard enough. But when you've focused on one, this is it, then that ceases to be about you, and the bond, it's about the other one, and it's not just that it's about the other one, but that becomes your pleasure. Your pleasure is the other one. The Rabbi Yoel talks about Purim Tafshin Tezvav. So this is 5 years before this Purim. So he describes what went on at the Farbrengen. Purim Farbrengens by the Rebbe were generally very long. They were their own style. They're unique. I mean, all the Farbrengens, the different times of year, had the unique flavor to them. And the Purim Farbrengen was very long. It was a long Farbrengen. And towards the end of the Farbrengen, during the singing, so a long line of people had lined up to come ask the Rebbe for a bracha. Purim especially, the Rebbe was in a visibly positive mood, in a good mood, and the nature of the sichas and the tone, everything is very open. And Purim, we know Purim is such a special day, such a holy day, and you can achieve through simcha and joy. So people wanted to use the opportunity. And he goes on aside, he mentions how it was something that seemed to not really be in the spirit of the Farbrengen. Like the Farbrengen was a time to connect with the audience and to teach, and the people coming and asking questions was sort of, eventually that kind of slowed down, although it remained a little bit throughout the years, but for the most part it's so that people wouldn't necessarily line up. But this particular time, so it's towards the end of Farbrengen, after many sichos, and there's a long line, and people are coming to ask the Rebbe for brachas, one for this, and somebody for something else. Anyway, after the line finally finishes, the Rebbe says that a day like what today is, when you talk about connecting with God, wanting to connect with God, what would be the greatest time you would think would be Yom Kippur, But really, Yom Kippur, as we know, is Yom HaKippurim. It's like Purim, meaning Purim is even higher. Purim is the day that you can connect with God, to just be connected with Him. And instead of focusing on God, people are focusing on their problems, either problems that are real problems or problems they convince themselves are problems, and not only material problems or physical problems, even spiritual ones. This one is worried about his deficit and his budget, and this one's worried about his Ava and his Yira, the way he feels about God. But Purim, the Rebbe says, is a time to connect. I think it relates to this idea, l'istakala b'ikara de malka, just to think about God, not to think about yourself, not even yourself in relation to God, just about Him. I think that, so he goes on to discuss how that encapsulates the whole idea of Purim, what Purim is all about, but that's really will take us in a different direction. I think that's what the meaning here of Yoinasi is, where we're talking about it's outside of yourself. It's not coming from the perspective of the world, of reality, and even transcending reality. It's the point of reference is not me, it's God. That's the idea of the Yoinasi. Okay. The second paragraph here of chapter 6. Through this, after we've reached this level of Yoinasi, this gazing, this powerful gaze, recognizing or delighting that our pleasure is from Him, or He is our pleasure. So then we reach the highest level, the level of Tamasi, what's Tamasi? Meloshin Shleimus, it means completion, perfection, perfect. So you could translate Tamasi, that God refers to us as Tamasi, as my perfect one, meaning that He thinks that we're perfect, right? We're perfect, but here He's going to translate differently. It's not that He's saying that we're perfect. He's calling us Tamasi, my perfection. What's my perfection? It's already a whole different thing. My perfection means you perfect me. You complete me. Not that you're complete on your own. I see you're perfect and you're complete. But that you complete me. This means, this level of Tamasi, this Shleimus, this perfection means that we partner with God. That there is a need, so to speak, in our work, in our service. He desires our work. What we do is what He desires, what our achievements. Through this general service of where the general idea of Mesiras Nefesh, the opening the door, like we said, the crack, the point of the needle, and that permeates the person. It's a nem durch. It totally, completely, the person's completely absorbed in it and captures it. Yeah, it's a inyan da achaisi. That's the idea of achaisi. Shezuhi havoida shemitzad. I'm sorry. That this idea of Mesiras Nefesh permeates the idea of achaisi. Shezuhi havoida shemitzad koiches hanefesh of medida v'agbala, which, as we said, that represents serving God within our abilities. V'chayde gam esinyan derayasi, and it also permeates the idea of Rayasi, which is Shazo Havayda de Torah. This is the idea of Torah and the achievement through Torah. Be it through what we achieve through Torah, of bringing the transcendent level of God with integration, or the idea of Chol Ma'adecha, the idea of serving God outside, beyond our capacities, outside of our comfort zone. To the point that then, once the person's going through these stages, he suddenly comes to the conclusion, the realization that his whole pleasure is God. This is the idea of the most powerful form of gazing, of locking eyes. So then he's complete. What does that mean, that he's complete? That he completes the purpose. He achieves the purpose of God's will, which is to have a home down here in this world. So how is that done? How do you make a home for God in this world? Obviously, by serving God. You do Torah, you do mitzvahs, you make a home for God. But the ultimate experience of making a home for God is when we recognize it's not just about bringing God into the world and having Him impose Himself on creation. Right? As we discussed about Achaisi and even Rayasi. But it's about recognizing that is our very essence as well, our pleasure. Not just that our existence is dependent on it and conditional based upon it, but that's that whole That is all of reality.
Aren't you then putting more of an emphasis on us, on the person, you're saying he's the one that's...
Well, no, because ultimately it's his will, it's his vision, it's his purpose that's being fulfilled. So it's not about us. In other words, I could do a mitzvah because I gain something out of it, I benefit something from it. But if I'm doing a mitzvah because I'm making a home for God, there's nothing in it for me. Obviously, ultimately, God's will. What does it mean? When I'm doing it because that's what God wants and it's going to fulfill His purpose, so I could say that's my purpose. But already, it's not the same purpose as my ulterior motive, my personal benefit I'm going to get from it. On the contrary, the whole point is to recognize that your purpose is God's purpose, not that you have your own purpose. That's the whole point. So from Yoinasi we come to Tamasi. We complete that purpose, and we complete it in the most perfect way. That it's not just about making the world hospitable to God with our own interests, so we achieve it to some extent, but the ultimate experience of it, and that's ultimately when Mashiach comes, when we have that dir b'tachtonim, is that it completes God and completes His will. So that's how we get to that point. The inyan zeh, Hashlemus the Tamasi, this perfection of Tamasi, is related, is connected to the beginning, which is the opening the door like the tip of the needle. Though we said peacefully, that's the beginning, that's even before Achaisi, we're in a state where we're not at all involved, not at all interested. There seems to be no connection. And that's where that's the starting point. So even though that seems to be the lowest level, even before we get to that point of Achaisi, nevertheless it's connected, it's bound with the ultimate, the highest level, which is the level of Tamasi, where we complete God's will and complete Him, as it were. As is known, the highest levels is connected with the lowest of levels. This is why the ultimate will of God is He desires asiyah, doing, action, maisa gadol, great action. In our physical world, which is called the world of asiyah, of action, specifically in this world, in this reality, where we, by breaking and transforming the unholy, we make a home for God. So if the ultimate purpose is making the home for God, and we get to that point by realizing, how do we get to that ultimate point? By recognizing that our whole reality is really Him, that what we want is really what He wants. It's His desire that's burning within us, not our own motives. So that completes that picture. Now, what does that mean that it's connected to the beginning? Because when you're not at all interested, and it takes Mesiras Nefesh to serve God. And what's Mesiras Nefesh? It's expressed not, Mesiras Nefesh is not a feeling. Mesiras Nefesh isn't a feeling, Mesiras Nefesh is an act. An act. It's not just going, but you're doing. And why are you doing? Like we said when we discussed Mesiras Nefesh, you're not motivated by any kind of conscious reasoning for it. At least that's Mesiras. You could decide to have self-sacrifice, but that's not the Mesiras Nefesh we're talking. When we talk Mesiras Nefesh, what we mean by Mesiras Nefesh is it's something that's rooted, I guess, in the subconscious. It's not something that you've decided to do. It's an essential. You can't not do it. So where do you feel this level of tamasi? The idea that your whole existence is God, ironic, it's interestingly, because the top and the end, they're rooted in each other, you feel that in the first level, in the level of Mesiras Nefesh. Because what motivates you? There is no motivator. It's just that bond with God. So what's expressing itself when you have Mesiras Nefesh? It's God inside of you that's expressing Himself, not you. It's not about you. Once that happens, then already it starts to permeate your consciousness. So that becomes Achaisi and Rayasi, till even Yoinasi, and then Tamasi, and that brings us back in a sense. So in a sense, when you stop a Yid on the street and you ask him to put on tefillin, and he's not even interested, he doesn't even desire to do it, he doesn't want to, he doesn't get anything from it, he's not feeling spiritually enlightened by it, it doesn't mean anything to him, in a certain sense, that's the ultimate performance of the mitzvah. In a sense, obviously there's kavanah, but in a sense, why? Because what's active here? What's active here is that a Yid puts on tefillin. Why? Because he's a Yid. Nothing else. There's no personal agenda or personal motive here. When we get to Tamasi, we can appreciate the Pischuli, we can appreciate the Mesiras Nefesh. Once we can complete God, once we recognize that our whole existence is God, that there's no personal agenda, there's no feeling of self anymore, then we can appreciate that level of Mesiras Nefesh. And we can understand and appreciate the value of action. Because it's in action that desire, that God's desire for Dir B'Tachtonim is expressed. It happens. It happens in the action. And that occurs in both the beginning and in the end. So that completes the discussion of the levels of Pischuli, of Achaisi, Rayasi, and Nasi Samasi. And then, in chapter 7, we continue the next part of the Pasuk, Shereishi Nimlatol. Okay, should we?
He just said that we should tell people for next week